Hello everybody, my name is Michael, and in today's video what we're going to be doing is this right here. So if that looks interesting to you, please carry on and watch the video. And also, just one more thing before we go. Please, if you enjoy the video, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. But with all that out of the way, let's carry on with the video. Okay, so just before we start painting this miniature, as you can see here, I've just given him a prime, and I've also given him some texture to the base as well, to really help set the scene here. And as you can see, I've also done a zenithal highlight prime, and this is so I can take full effect of the contrast paint that I'm using here. And I'm going to be starting off with flesh, which is a darkish skin tone, so I want to give him like this nice dark looking skin tone, and it's going to really help sell the effect with the zenithal prime on there as well, that I'm going to get different tones in that skin as I'm placing this on. Also too, while I'm painting this up, I actually used 2 coats of the flesh on here. I want to give them a nice really dark skin tone and really take full effect with that zenithal highlight prime, still even with multiple layers on here. But definitely when you apply multiple layers, make sure that you wait for the first one to completely dry first before applying the second one, if you want to do what I'm doing here. Then once you have that skin completely dry and you've got it the way you want it to, what I'm going to do is come in here with rakharth flesh now. And what I'm going to be doing with this is I'm going to be using it to pick out the little sort of bumps and boils and stuff he has on his skin. They're dotted around all over the place, and I'm just coming in and just carefully highlighting those in with a fine tip brush here, just really making sure that I can try and pick those out. There are quite a few all over the body, so don't be afraid to spend a little bit of time looking around and picking out the ones you want here. And it's just to add in a little bit of extra color to our skin tone here and really give you something to look at on the skin as you're looking around the model from a distance. Then once we have those bumps picked out, what we're going to do now is come in with some black grey. And what I'm going to be doing with this is I'm going to be using it for his hair. So that's of course his facial hair, as well as the hair that he's got coming from his head all the way down to sort of his back as well. This nice sort of like long massive mohawk. I'm just going around and making sure that we give it a nice good overall coverage, especially since all the hair is like nicely depicted and detailed, and it's all sort of like individually sculpted, so don't be afraid to spend a little bit of time. Make sure you pick out all those hairs from the head all the way down to the back. Then once you have his hair painted up, what we're going to do now is come in with some mephisthon red, and it's of course a nice strong bright vibrant red, and I'm going to be using it for the clothing that he has on him, basically, which is basically pretty much just a loincloth, and he also has this sort of like a patch of cloth that is just underneath the wrappings on his arm as well, so I want to pick that out too. And the mephisthon red, as you can see, is nice and vibrant, so it's going to give us something really eye-catching to look for on the table from a distance, so it can really stand out as a nice piece. And then you can see me just picking out that little bit of scrap of cloth that he has there. Totally up to you whether you want to paint that as the color of his loincloth there, or you want to paint it as the wrappings around him too, because it could very easily be both. Then once we have that nice vibrant red picked out, what we're going to do now is come in with some deck tan, and this is going to be used for the wrappings that I was talking about just before. And he has a nice lot of them on his arms and also on his legs as well, so of course as you're picking them out, especially the ones on the legs, they get a lot thinner, so don't be afraid to switch to a smaller brush if you need to make sure that you just pick out the actual wrappings themselves and we don't get any spillage in any areas we don't want it to, especially with that skin, since we've got that contrast paint on there with the lighting of the priming that we have underneath. It can be very tricky to try and get that to look natural, so we just want to practice a lot of brush control here and make sure that we keep a nice steady hand and really make sure we want that paint to go where we want to, so don't overload it on your brush. Then once we have that complete, what we're going to be doing now is going to come in with some Mahogany Brown. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to use this Mahogany Brown to be painting up this nice sort of like a wrist covering he has here, sort of like a leather gauntlet that he's got on here, just giving that a good overall coverage here. Then once we have that complete, what we're going to be doing now is coming in with some matte black. And what I'm going to be doing with this is I'm going to be using it for the straps that are holding up his armor around his chest. So totally up to you what you want to do here. You could also use the leather brown in the last step for this as well. I wanted to use black here to separate it out even more, just adding a bit more color to the miniature here, but totally up to you what you want to do here. And of course it's just a matter of going around with a fine tip brush like you can see here that I'm using, and being very careful that we don't get any overspill where we don't want it to be, especially since we're working so close to the skin areas with this. And of course, don't forget the belt around his waist as well, that's holding up that loincloth. Then once we have all the belts on his body picked out, what we're going to do now is come in with some skeleton bone, and as the name implies, we're going to use it for some skeletons. And this nice big sort of Fomorid crusher here is covered in skeletons here, well, just the skulls anyway. So what we want to do is go around and pick out all the skulls that he's decorating himself with, showing off how fierce he is, and giving them a nice overall coat. Make sure you have a look around the whole model, because there is quite a few on there, so make sure you careful when you're picking them out as well, like I said before, because we don't want it to get on that skin, which can be very hard to try and fix at this step. So practicing your brush control as well, especially since the skulls have these nice intricate detail on them too. They're very well sculpted, so don't be afraid to spend a little bit of time on each of the skulls. Then once we have all those skulls picked out, what I'm going to do now is come in with some deep blue. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use this to dry brush on his hair. So that's his facial hair and of course his hair on his head. And I'm just giving this a nice dry brushing over top. I felt it was feeling a little bit boring if I was going to keep it with the black tone and highlight it up a bit grey. I wanted something a little bit different, something a little bit more flashy, and that's why I'm going with a nice blue highlight here to give it something sort of interesting to look at and give it just that little bit of individuality. So just giving it a nice dry brush over here, being very light. Of course, I'm not trying to turn it into blue here, I just want to give it sort of like a blue shine in the light, so aiming for those highlights basically. Okay, then once we've highlighted that here, what I'm going to do now is come with some oily steel. And this is a nice gritty metallic color, and I'm going to be using it for all the metallic areas on the model. Now, there are quite a lot of metallic areas on this model, since I've gone with the options that have all these chains coming off him, and as well as he's got his belt buckles and stuff like that. So don't be afraid to spend some time looking around that model, making sure you pick out all those metal areas, and of course giving it a nice overall coat. And like I said, I'm going with the oily steel here, sorry, that has a sort of like gritty-ish texture to it, because I wanted it to not look like brand new metal. So giving it this little like gritty texture in there, I think is really going to help it out, make it look like it's a lot more aged and stuff like that. So don't be afraid to do things like that too. Not everything has to be perfect gleaming steel, so that's why I wanted to like gritty it up, especially since this thing looks like he's busted out of his imprisonment and he's going on a walk of revenge. So that's what I'm trying to go for here, and having the oily steel is going to help out with that. Then once we have that complete, what I'm going to be doing now is coming in with some orc blood, and this is a nice purple color, and I'm going to be using it for his tongue here, just giving a nice different color that we want to have in here. Like that, like I said, we want to go for some nice eye-catching pieces, and adding in little different colors here and there can really help with that. And so it's just a matter of coming in and giving some nice coats over that tongue. Then once we have that tongue painted up, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in with some grey colours, and this is going to be for all the stonework on the model. So I'm using castle grey, uniform grey and ash grey, but totally up to you what you want to do here. Any sort of stone colour is going to work, whether you want to make it sort of sandstone or sort of your traditional stone like I'm going with here. Totally up to you what you want to do here, and it's just a matter of laying on the paints, and then I'm going on with the base coat here, and then coming in with some dry brushing highlights over top to give it that real stone texture. But totally up to you what you want to do here. This is just a nice simple basic technique to get our stone, but also you might want to theme it with however you're going with this model if you're painting up the same model as I am here. But totally up to you what to do here, just to add in some of that sort of nice stone effect. Is simple and quick and easy. Then once we have that complete, what I'm going to be doing now is coming in with a wash, and I'm going to be using Seraphim Sepia for this, which is a nice, of course, sepia tone wash, and I'm going to be using this to give a wash over our wrappings that we've got here, as well as our skulls too. So making sure we give them an overall coverage, and you can see I'm using a smaller brush to place this wash here, so I can be a bit more precise where I'm placing this wash. I don't want it where I don't really want it to sort of pull down or have a high risk of over pulling into areas I don't want it to. So using a finer brush to control the wash a little bit more. As well as that, I also painted the ground texture as well from where the stones were, and this is just a generic sort of brown. Any brown you can use here for what you want, or depending on where the environment you're using it for, just use it to match your environment here. But I'm just going with a nice simple ground texture color, so just basic brown for me. Then once that wash is completely dry, what we're going to do now is come in with some argrax earthshade, and of course this is a brown wash, so any brown wash will do. Here I'm using argrax earthshade for this, and this is of course you're going to go over all of our brown areas, so going over our stonework, our leathered areas, but I'm not going to go over with the skin or anything like that. The skin is done here, so I didn't want to add a flesh tone wash or a brown tone wash here, but totally up to you if you want to do here. That's just going to make it darker, but that's why I went with the 2 coats of our contrast paint to give the skin a darker look rather than applying a wash over top. So like I said here, just giving a wash over all the brown things that we want here, and of course don't be afraid to switch to a smaller brush in the areas where you're getting over those leather straps and things like that where you don't want it to be. And of course you can see here I'm being very careful not to get it on any of the chains, so I want to give a different wash to the actual chains and other metallic areas, so being careful around those places. Then once we have that wash completely dry, what I'm doing now is coming in with some brassy brass, and as it implies, it's a brass color, so a nice different color from our silvers here, but you could go with a gold or any other type of metallic that you want here. And I'm going to be using it for the symbol that he has on him all over the place. Now he does have a couple of these. He does have one on skin, one on his loincloth area as well, so don't forget to pick them out too as you're painting them up. But I wanted something there that's a different color from our metallics to give it a nice visual eye-catching look. As well as that, I'm also going with the little belt buckles here, just giving them some more visual interest on there, so it's not so dark around those areas, but also not just silver as well. Just, like I said, adding in that visual interest to the pieces. So don't be afraid to spend some time and go around picking out all these little details. And as you can see too, I'm also just skimming the brush just over top, especially those areas on the skin, so we're not getting any metallics in the areas we don't want it to. Then once we have that complete, what we're going to do now is come in with a dark tone wash. And of course you could use Nuln Oil here, any sort of black wash will do here, because I love the way it comes over metallic colours especially. But I'm also going to be applying it to our loincloth area, which is red. It's a great way to give red a nice deep colour without changing it too much if we had used a brown wash or a sepia wash, something like that. Basically the black wash is just darkening it straight down to a darker red, rather than changing the colour slightly. So I want to keep that nice red in there, especially since the mephisthon red is a nice vibrant red. And of course, just being careful again, like you can see here, using a smaller brush to place our wash so I don't get it anywhere where I don't want it to, especially since we've got a lot of those skulls and stuff around there. Very easily able to get that wash to accidentally land all over that too. So just being careful around these sort of areas as you're placing our wash. Then once we have that complete, we're going to come in now with some deck tan once again, and this is going to be used for our highlights on our straps and our wrappings that we have here. I should say the wrappings. Since we've got those here, we've been really nice and sort of careful with our highlights, making sure that I'm trying to pick out at least one of each of those little bits of wrappings and keeping that wash around the edge, although it may be a little bit hard to see here since my camera's not in focus. And there we go, you can actually see what I'm doing here since it's not so blurry. And it's just a matter of going around picking them out so we get some individual highlights on the areas, especially aiming for those areas where the sun would naturally hit on them, really giving that nice bright appearance as if the sunlight is hitting it. Then once you're happy with those wrappings highlighted, we're going to come back in with some mephisthon red now, and this is of course being for our red areas, which is our loincloth and that little bit of cloth that's just underneath his wrapping there as well. And as you can see, picking out those highlights, which is actually not too hard to do on this model here, since there's nicely sculpted in detail with these nice big wavy flowy areas where it's nice and easy to pick out the high ridges, and especially the way that it flows in the wind too, nice and easy to catch those edges. So don't be afraid to really place on the paint here so we get a nice good highlight of especially those areas where the sun is going to be naturally hitting. And it's a matter of course going around and making sure to paint up these areas. As you can see here, I'm moving the model all around in funny angles just so I can catch those in the areas where they would be, to avoid getting paint anywhere where we don't want our paint to be. A nice easy technique to just get it where you want it to, maybe holding it at some funny weird angles, but at least you can get that highlight nice and even. Then once you have that complete, what we're going to do now is come in with some dry rust, which is a nice effect paint here. And what I'm going to be doing is placing it on sort of like a wash. I've thinned it down just a little bit with some water here, and I'm going to be placing it in some areas where rust will occur, as well as just making it look nice and sort of gritty and really rusty, especially with that oily steel that we use to paint this up, which has a sort of like a gritty-ish look to it as well. So we're really going to make it come out with hopefully a nice rusted effect in the end and make it look like it's really old, worn metal, especially since I'm going for the look that he's busted out of his confinements there from sort of old age and degradation, really trying to smash his way out, and he's coming for his revenge. Then once you're happy with your rust effects here, what we're going to do is come back in again with oily steel, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using it in a dry brushing motion essentially, and I'm just going to be sort of stippling it on in areas where some sun would naturally sort of glint off, especially since we've got that nice rust effect on there. I don't want to intrude too much on the rust effect, and I'm also going to be sort of dry brushing the edges, as well, giving it sort of a very rough, uneven highlighting, rather than making it nice and smooth and easy with edge highlighting. I'm just making it sort of scattered all over the place, so it looks like it's a bit more worn and has a lot of more wear and tear on it. Then once we have that completed, what I'm going to do is come in with some flat yellow. I'm just going to use it for one simple piece of the model, and that is to dot in our eye, a nice bright, vibrant yellow eye here. Totally up to you what you want to do, the color of the eye here. I'm going, like I said, with a nice vibrant color, really give it an eye attracting look on the piece from a distance, and as you can see there, it's nice and bright against all that nice dark detail that we have around the face. And then for one last quick little detail here, I'm just going to come on some barbarian flesh, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to use this to be painting in his toenails, just give him some nice lighter skin toenails and his already dark skin he has on him, and as you can see there, it's going to really help make those toenails stand out a little bit as well. And I'm also just going to apply some wash quickly. I'm going to use a seraphim sepia wash to make it sort of look a little grungy and that. But with that, we'll have our miniature completed. So let's see what he looks like in those nice glamour shots. And with all that complete, we have finally finished painting up our Fomorid crusher from Warhammer Age of Sigmar by Games Workshop. So I hope this video has been helpful for you guys, whether you want to paint what I have to paint in here, or just use the videos from inspiration and painting up your own miniatures. But with all that said guys, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I can't wait to see you all in the next video.